Today, we are fortunate to have a true nursing leader with us to deliver today's presentation on restorative justice and resilience. Dr. Jerry Gorman is a clinical professor in the college's Population Health Nursing Science Department. For close to 20 years, Dr. Gorman has practiced as a hospice nurse, maintaining a commitment to end-of-life care and providing community health clinical experiences in hospice for nursing students. Dr. Gorman actually began her career as a student of English literature and worked in social services for a bit, but finding herself unable to provide as much comfort and care as she wanted, in her 30s, she decided to return to school to pursue a nursing license. She began her hospice work in 2002 and hasn't looked back since. Dr. Gorman is also a passionate champion for social justice initiatives, volunteering over 20 years of her time to engage in prison outreach. Dr. Gorman believes that nurses carry a significant social mandate to act in a way that's beneficial to society, and is an advocate for the inclusion of humanities in nursing education and practice. A member of the American Public Health Association's Peace Caucus, she advocates for primary prevention of war strategies and has designed a primary prevention of war elective. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jerry Gorman.
Well, once again, Sarah, thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to be with you all this morning. It's always an honor to be able to speak to what I've learned about restorative justice practices and application. And I do stress this is an ongoing process for me. I am far from any kind of an expert on this topic. Much of what I've learned in the last few years came from the generosity of the community at Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation, which I will henceforth refer to as Precious Blood, which is located on Chicago's South Side in the Back of the Yards neighborhood. Precious Blood is one of 7 restorative justice hubs in Chicago, and they have shown me and our students remarkable hospitality over the past 5 years. I've been interested in justice reform for most of my adult life and volunteered, as Sarah mentioned, in a maximum state security prison in Indiana, starting in the 90s and continuing through until the epidemic shut everything down. I trace this concern about punishment and confinement back to my childhood, when, as a very impressionable kid in the early 60s, I watched on television a 1950s film noir depiction of the story of Barbara Graham, executed by the state of California for a murder she fervently denied committing. The graphic imagery of a woman being led to the gas chamber by a priest and a white-capped nurse had quite an impression on my developing sense of morality and mercy. I mention this partly as a curiosity, but also to suggest that we are well advised to pay attention to what horrifies us as children before we've started to acclimate to the ethical compromises that society requires. This quote from the philosopher Albert Camus was an intimation that how we choose to deal with wrongdoing, perceived or real, has a great deal to say about who we are as individuals and as a society. And also, to state the obvious, although this film was my childhood introduction to a punitive criminal justice system, it was hardly representative of those most likely to suffer within it. The actress Susan Hayward walking to the execution chamber in high heels and sparkly earrings was based on a true but idiosyncratic story. Black Americans are incarcerated at nearly 5 times the rate of white Americans, while members of the Latinx community are 1.3 times more likely to be incarcerated than non-Latinx whites. So although this sense of moral injustice stayed with me into adulthood, it was not until I began taking students into Cook County Jail about 5 years ago that I actively sought out other interventions and philosophies which embraced a mandate for both accountability and forgiveness. This led me to Precious Blood and its work in restorative justice. Like Sister Donna, who you will see a little bit later in this presentation, I was stunned by what I encountered in the jail: the systemic racism, the severity of punishment, and the great longing of the detained men and women for the loved ones that they had left behind. As Donna mentions, many of the young men in the jail specifically worried about their mothers, about their well-being, about their opinion of their sons. When I heard that Precious Blood had peace circles, not only for the young people at risk of becoming ensnared in the carceral system, but also for the mothers whose children were lost to gun violence and/or to the prison system, I asked if I could learn more, and I have been learning ever since. Wasn't quite sure what people's familiarity with restorative justice might be, so I'll start with a couple of general definitions. Restorative justice has its roots within the truth and reconciliation movements internationally, as well as within the struggle for criminal justice reform and prison abolition here in the United States. Chicago is a well-known matrix for restorative justice practices, and they run the spectrum from preventative interventions to harm reduction. John Braithwaite is an emeritus professor and founder of the School of Regulation and Global Governance at the Australian National University. He's been active in the peace movement, the social movement for restorative justice, and the labor movement for over 50 years in Australia and globally. As his quote suggests, restorative justice practices have relevance whenever and wherever conflict between individuals emerge. So restorative justice is partly about the aim that justice processes repair the harm done through domination, whether that is the domination of crime, of war, or of school bullying. Because crime and war hurt, justice should heal. A basic tenet of restorative justice is that when harm occurs, it is not just between two people, but has reverberations which ripple out to others, including the surrounding community. As such, for healing to occur, the person who committed the harm, as well as the one harmed, must seek amends and restitution within a communal setting. Although restorative justice is not necessarily rooted in a faith-based approach to ethics and morality, it is certainly congruent with all. A foremost American scholar and practitioner of restorative justice is Howard Zehr, who was raised in the Mennonite Church, one of the recognized peace churches rooted in pacifist tradition. His book, Changing Lenses, A New Focus for Crime and Justice, first published in 1990, is acknowledged as one of the first to articulate a cohesive theory of restorative justice. Many of the longtime practitioners have attested to the fact that these practices infuse one's life, become a lens through which one looks at the world, a truth which is suggested by Zehr's quotes. I have to move my screen a little bit so I can. It is basically common sense, the kind of lessons our parents and foreparents taught, and that has led some to call it a way of life. When a wrong has been done, it needs to be named and acknowledged. Those who have been harmed need to be able to grieve their losses, to be able to tell their stories, to have their questions answered. That is, to have the harms and needs caused by the offense addressed. They and we need to have those who have done wrong accept their responsibility and take steps to repair the harm to the extent that it is possible. My screen is, can you hear me still? Yeah, okay, I can't, I'm having trouble advancing my slides here.
Uh-oh.
Can you make them larger?
Mikkel, you can do that with your own settings. That's not something that we're able to do. But I believe if you, while Jerry's trying to figure that slide advancing out, we're very sorry.
Okay, wait, let's see here.
Technology issues.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, great.
Okay. I first encountered restorative justice practices in the Chicago area through an NPR interview with Susan Treichman, who is the founder of Evanston's Kurtz Cafe. This cafe trains and employs young people caught up in the juvenile justice system. Susan then introduced me to the work of Precious Blood. Its executive director, Father David Kelly, came to our public health nursing classes, and at my invitation, he facilitated a peace circle held in the third floor event center back in the days when we could do such things. The circle drew interested students and practitioners from across campus and the allied health care systems. Through Father Kelly, I came to know Sister Donna Liete, the octogenarian nun who formerly ran a re-entry home for women returning from prison. She now facilitates the women's program serving mothers whose children have been lost to violence, either as victims of Chicago's rampant firearm availability or to our prison system, and sometimes to both. These women sit side by side each other in peace circles, mothers whose children have been murdered and mothers whose children have held the guns. Precious Blood services are wraparound. For the community's youth, they offer alternatives to the dangers of the streets, a safe and hospitable center to hang out, with food and fellowship and hospitality for all. Vocational programs include t-shirt silk screening, a wood workshop, and educational tutoring. There are arts and crafts and an RJ gallery across the street on 51st, where neighborhood art is displayed. There are support services for families with an incarcerated loved one, and they now offer limited re-entry housing for those who are returning to the community post-incarceration. A bountiful community garden feeds visitors to the center, as well as the community's residents. Restorative justice maxims are simple and powerful. Hurt people, hurt people. Precious Blood cares for both, for they realize that violence is systemic and endemic. They practice accompaniment. When a young person needs to go to court, they go with him. They stand by her, return home with them. Such hospitality is both a physical space and an attitude of being. When harm is done, the community comes together and works to repair and restore, seeking to understand both the one who harmed and the one who sustained the harm. At the heart of this work is the healing that comes through the peace circles. These circles provide the foundation which girds the work of restorative justice. Again, not quite sure what everyone's experience with peace circles has been. They bear some similarity to the so-called feminist circles and processes which were embraced during the 70s and the 80s. Here we see a circle in a middle school. The guiding philosophy comes from Indigenous practice that ritualized conflict resolution, making it nonlinear and egalitarian. There is a facilitator or facilitators, but it is non-hierarchical, and communication is guided by whomever holds the talking piece. The talking pieces bear significance for the participants, and they are passed in the circle always to the right. While the speaker holds it, they have the undivided attention of the circle. There is no debate, no argumentation, no responding, just focused listening. Most circles are formed around a central altar, which holds the talking pieces and other objects of significance. Often they include the values and the norms on which participants agreed prior to the initiation of the circle. In the Mother's Circle at Precious Blood, the central altar always includes the name tags of all the mothers who have sat in that circle. So this brief video offers something of the spirit of the Mother's Circle. I warn you, it sometimes is a little bit glitchy and gets stuck for a few seconds mid-video. I hope it won't, but it's only a few minutes long. So if that happens, please bear with me.
Hey, hello everybody. It's wonderful. We have a little circle, sort of, but actually much bigger than I expected with the snow out there, so I didn't expect many people to come at all, many mothers, women, so it's good. So let's just take a moment to kind of concentrate on our candle and just the presence of God. One of the primary things that we do is to work with youth, boys 14 to 24, and try to prevent violence and gang life. And so I had gone to the juvenile detention center, and as I would talk to the boys, they'd say, "Will you call my mother?" So I started calling the mothers. So we meet once a month, and we gather and we have a real nice brunch for them, because no one really honors these women whose children
I did not know the dynamics of the mother circle. In the circle, you know, you kind of like sharing your stories. You go around one by one holding a talking piece and you're telling your stories. And so as we're going around, I'm listening to all these mom stories. And then I'm thinking to myself, I'm in the wrong circle, because I'm hearing stories of mothers who have children that are incarcerated for actually murdering somebody.
I'm not one that has lost any of my children through violence, but I had a daughter that was a perpetrator of violence. So one of my biggest fears when I would get those 2 or 3 o'clock morning calls was that she either got killed or killed somebody.
We all have the same issues, but we may have a different story on how we got there. In that circle, I think we all was able to help each other to get to a place of healing, because at the end of the day, we all had a loss. And that's what I had discovered from that circle. And I think many of those other women had discovered as well.
Why I come is just to provide a space and just to be with women who have such powerful stories, such rich souls. You're rich in your soul. Your stories really need to be told and beyond. Those of you who have lost children to violence, you have lost children to incarceration, you're very, very special women. You're good women, and you're hurting women. And we have a challenge as a community to help you through that.
I'm so sorry. It never stuck that much. I apologize. I hope that you were able to get enough to get a little bit of the spirit of the Mother's Circle. 5 years ago, I did a weekend training with a facilitator on the west side of Chicago. And a year later, I went through one of Precious Blood's 3-day trainings for circle facilitators. A few years ago, a reading that we did in a class that I taught here in the College of Nursing caused an unanticipated rift among the students. I invited Pamela, who was the facilitator who had provided my training, to help me with an optional peace circle for the students. While not attended by all of the students, it nevertheless deepened my belief that restorative justice practices have application and validity within our community, within our university community as well. In addition, I have facilitated circles with my clinical groups, and they have worked exceedingly well. It allows the students to be seen and heard in a different, newly authentic fashion. In the sharing of stories, both lighthearted and more profound, they accompany one another, and the circle provides the hospitality. Before the pandemic hit, I had plans to initiate circle training for the correctional officers in Cook County Jail. Pamela had agreed to help me. I still hope that we can have the opportunity. Offering circles in the jail for staff could also provide a balm for the hurt people who hurt people. I also want to briefly acknowledge the work that's being done within our own law school here at UIC. For the past 10 years, law professor Michael Sang and retired judge Sheila Murphy have been offering a course in restorative justice to their students. Last year, I attended most of the sessions that they offered, which included a peace circle as part of their weekly format. Rather than describe their work, I asked Michael and Sheila to say a little bit about what they believe the impact had been upon their students, and this is what they said. For the past 10 years, the UIC Law School has been offering this course on restorative justice to its 2nd and 3rd year law students. The students participate in the circle processes and discuss the use of restorative justice with practitioners who work in various areas of criminal and juvenile justice, civil law, and other related fields, such as psychology and public health. They also engage in an externship program for a 1 credit hour where they work 4 hours a week in the community. The effect on the law students has been profound. It has reinvigorated their desire to engage in the practice of law, and it has opened new vistas to them about how law can be practiced. By their 2nd and 3rd year, many law students become jaded and start to question whether the profession is really something that they want. This course allows them to refocus their priorities and see law as a healing profession and in less adversarial terms. The discussions about trauma and coping have been especially useful to the students. The law school experience itself produces stress, and this stress has been magnified as a result of the isolation produced by the COVID pandemic. The Law Students Council elementary and high school students in some of the poorest and most violent neighborhoods in Chicago. Many of these children are suffering severe trauma as a result of their life experiences, and this trauma is not addressed in the schools. The students work with these children individually and in circles, and allow them to share and confront their fears and frustrations. Working with the children educates the law students about the effects of racism, violence, and poverty. Some of the law students have never visited Chicago's poor and more segregated neighborhoods. This experience is refocusing their personal and professional aspirations. End quote. So to recap, historically, restorative justice has had a legalistic application and denotation. It is an approach to dealing with those found to have transgressed, not in a way that is punitive, but in a way that recognizes that when harm has been done, it ruptures the cohesion of a community, and only by coming together can the community heal and restore integrity. It has applications across the spectrum, from the restoration that occurs in reentry programs to primary prevention occurring across all levels of education, including the university. The earlier we are taught that punishment and retribution are not effective strategies for individual and communal growth, the more hope there is for peaceful communities. If we strive to regard ourselves as a community in the College of Nursing, somewhere on the spectrum of Dr. King's call for that elusive, beloved community, restorative justice has potential applications for us as well. Its strategies are not only ways to offer nonviolent conflict resolution, but also to strengthen our understanding of one another. That, I believe, we could use across all levels, between faculty, between staff, between faculty and staff, across and within cohorts of students, and to increase empathy and appreciation between students, faculty, and staff. And as mentioned, it does offer a different way to approach conflict, and thus can perhaps provide us an option to circumvent angry emails and comments in the chat box or social media sites, endless grievances, outraged students, and defensive faculty. Restorative justice helped to end the South African apartheid system. It is being applied in Ireland's classrooms to circumvent a return to the sectarian suspicion that gave rise to centuries of oppression and violent resistance. In this time of sustained political and societal strife and prolonged public health crises, we can benefit from a closer consideration of what these practices might offer us as well. For the past 20 years, I've had the privilege of teaching the incoming students who enter our college to pursue nursing. I have taught introductory courses to our traditional undergraduates, as well as to students in our graduate entry program. A certain level of anxiety is natural and to be expected, but in the last 2 years, the number of students expressing fear of burnout is reaching its own epidemic proportions. They use that term as that is what's broadcast across our mainstream and social media outlets. The American Association of Critical Care Nurses defines moral distress as occurring when one knows the ethically correct action to take, but are constrained from taking it. Whether it arises from internal or external sources, moral distress signals a dissonance with our core values. It is a dis-ease with our conscience. And this, I believe, is the real fear we reference when we speak of burnout. The symptoms of moral distress manifest as physical, emotional, and/or psychological, and can include headaches, palpitations, gastric upset, anger, guilt, frustration, withdrawal, and depression. Over time, without interventions, these symptoms of distress can calcify into moral injury. This is what students fear the most, and with good reason. It is everywhere, as the recent New York Times opinion piece testified, as it made its way across multiple media outlets. With its guiding principles of accountability and restitution, restorative justice challenges us to identify the source of the harm and seek restoration of community coherence and integrity. The intervention is the circle which connects us, bids us pause and seek peace among the chaos. And it offers us the opportunity to be truly heard. Without such expression, healing remains elusive. Whoever we are, and regardless of our circumstances, we have common needs. As they're recognized, those who have been harmed need to grieve, to speak of their loss, to have the offense addressed and repaired to the extent possible. This is true for mothers in our communities, for nurses in our hospitals, for faculty and students in our classrooms. It is true for all of us. Restorative justice provides an opportunity to see each other in a new way, to view our individual and collective identity in an altered light. It does so largely by allowing us to hear a portion of each other's complex and unique stories. Another restorative justice maxim is, do not assume you know my story based on the chapter you walked in on. For those engaged in reform of the criminal justice system, this has immediate veracity. We are all much more than the worst act we have committed. But this is true for all of us. When constraints are imposed on our ability to teach, to practice, to live safely in our communities, coherence is ruptured, and its restoration requires expression. In the College of Nursing, we educate future and current practitioners, and we can model a way that they can be in the world. If restorative justice becomes a habit of being, then students can learn here in the college that the patient before them is more than a constellation of symptoms and lab data. This person has a story in need of a telling, so that healing can begin and ripple out to the community. 2 summers ago, I traveled to Northern Ireland to visit the intentional peace community of Corrymeela. Established in the 60s, it has been a valuable resource for those who seek to better understand how we may be more proactively peaceful and do less harm, less harm, less harm. I'd like to offer a poem written by Corrymeela's longtime director, Patriarcho Tuma. Poets testify to the power of words. And in these times of cascading violence and prolonged isolation, he suggests that it's not just the shooter, the perpetrator, who claims legitimate targets, but all systems constructed around punishment, expulsion, and exclusion, regardless of the consequences to the individual. So this then from Patriarch Otuma. Pedagogy of Conflict. When I was a child, I learned to count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But these days, I've been counting lives. So I count 1 life, 1 life, 1 life, 1 life. Because each time is the first time that that life has been taken. Legitimate target has 16 letters and 1 long, abominable space between 2 dehumanizing words. Corrymeela is an intentional community, as are the restorative justice hubs. Intentions are never enough, but they are a necessary first step, and they send a powerful message. So I wanted to leave to Sister Donna the concluding words in this presentation. The last Peace Circle that I attended was just this past Saturday. 30 women attended via Zoom at Donna's invitation. One mother, present for the first time, had 7 sons. 2 were in prison, 2 had been murdered, 1 died by suicide, and for another, she is the primary caregiver following his post-shooting paralysis. After the circle, I asked Donna for some thoughts on what sustains her in her work. And this is what she said. At this time, having just been in a restorative justice healing circle with 30 who have lost their children, either to gun violence or to incarceration, it is these moments that anchor me. I see women who hold the pain of knowing another human being gun down their son or daughter. Yet I see them struggling to live out their values of forgiveness, of respect, of listening to each other with their hearts, of holding on to their faith from which they can find hope, their desire to be connected, to connect, and to be transformed by the community of their sisters in the circle, by walking together through this suffering that is theirs individually and that is theirs as a group of women, end quote. So, restorative justice can offer healing to those who have lost so much. Surely we can make time to pause, to make some tea, to sit in a circle, and to listen to one another. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gorman. Let's all give her a round of applause, either with a reaction button or, air clap for this wonderful presentation. So I'm going to open it up now for questions from the audience. So if you haven't already, I did get some questions already in the chat field, but if you haven't already and you have something you want to ask, we'll spend about 15 minutes with the Q&A portion. So Jerry, can you provide your experiences regarding use of restorative justice programs in educational settings, preferably higher ed, but K through 12 could also suffice?
Well, as I mentioned, I've had some limited experiences in teaching my own classes and with clinical groups. We've talked about, certainly in the courses, in the community health courses that we have taught, we have always introduced restorative justice. Well, at least over the last few years, we have introduced the concept and practices of restorative justice. As I mentioned in the class, one of the introductory classes that I taught a few years ago, when we had some unrest and some dissonance and rift between the students, I did offer an optional peace circle over lunchtime, to which I would say maybe a third to a half of the students came. And that was it was an experiment, but it was quite successful in terms of allowing us to address the seriousness of what happened in a way that was non-threatening and outside of the classroom for the students. And then probably most significantly, I've used it with my clinical groups, and that has been really effective as a way for students to process the experiences that they've had, particularly with the criminal justice system, and also to get to know one another in a different kind of way, and to provide me as faculty and as their clinical instructor a way to be with them that was, again, kind of non-hierarchical. I know that work in the primary school, elementary schools, is a large part of the outreach that they try to do through Precious Blood's ministry, and they are certainly continuing that work through the law school. Unfortunately, everything's gotten shut down because of the pandemic, but that work has been going on actively for, I would say, at least the last 5 to 8 years in Chicago. It's not enough. I mean, the more the better. And as I mentioned in the presentation, the earlier we start talking about prevention and peace promotion, the better off we'll all be.
Okay, have you thought about restorative justice for refugees who are unwelcome in the receiving communities?
Well, I certainly think that it would have great application there. And some of the restorative justice hubs here in Chicago do have a particular outreach to refugee communities. So I'm sure it has great potential there as well in welcoming and in providing that kind of radical hospitality that is lacking in our national policies towards refugees.
Okay, where are the peace circles, specifically with UIC Nursing? Do they include faculty, administrators, staff, or are they only for students? Conflict, moral distress often seems to involve these others, is what the person commented.
Yeah, well, there hasn't, at this point in time, there is not any kind of a formal framework within the college for restorative justice practices. I hope that will come. And certainly the conversations that I have had with the administration, and particularly with our new dean, Eileen Collins, I know she has been very open and receptive to application for restorative justice, but it's not formalized at this point. So what I've done personally has been with students. It hasn't involved other faculty, but I think involving other faculty and staff is the way to go. And I think it would be
Okay. Okay. So someone commented, I'm really interested in how restorative justice could be used to address moral distress among humanitarian aid responders. In these groups, there would be significant power differences between international and locally hired nurses. I'm wondering how power differences are managed during a healing circle.
Well, there is, I mean, it is intentionally formatted and orchestrated to diminish any sense of power. That's why it's in a circle. It's why there's a talking piece. It's why there is a facilitator rather than a director or a leader. Everyone, it recognizes that everyone has a story to tell, and that the function of speaking and listening is something that is available to everyone on an equal basis, regardless of status or title or education or background or experience or whatever it might be. We're all brought together within a circle that recognizes our equality, and we are all there to listen to one another with as much focus as possible.
Okay, my question is about addressing power dynamics in a circle with students, so kind of similar, I guess, and faculty together. Are there any tips you have for that? Well,
again, it's speculative at this point because I have not done that personally, but in my experience participating in circles, I think that the function of being there, because we are all drawn by the same purpose to strengthen community, to recognize the validity and uniqueness of each person's story. I mean, obviously you have to come to the circle with those intentions. And that's why part of the circle work is often writing down your intentions and your expectations and placing them in the center of the circle there on the sort of altar space as a way of honoring those values. So, I mean, for it to work, faculty would have to come willing to let go of any sense of power or authority or, privilege that they have. We all meet on an equal basis. That's what the circle establishes.
Great. Can you describe how a peace circle could work virtually? Considering our world is so virtual now. They said there isn't an item to pass around nor a real circle to sit around. How would that work?
Yeah, it doesn't work as well. I mean, like most things, it doesn't work as well virtually as it does in person. The spirit of the circle is really you come together as individuals and recognize one another. But I have been to virtual circles and they're better than nothing. They're certainly better than nothing. There is not a talking piece that you can pass around on a Zoom screen, but people popcorn. So one person starts and then the next person recognizes the next person, and until each person has been recognized going around the Zoom. But again, it's not as good as being in person, as most things are not as good as being in person.
Yes, sure. But you make it work, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay, what can we do to help support you in requesting restorative justice to be implemented formally?
Well, is Dr. Dean Collins still on the Zoom? I think I'm kidding. I'm not trying to put Dean Collins on the spot. I think that if this is something that other faculty, students, and staff are interested in, I would love to hear from you. And we could certainly form our own kind of informal coalition. I did spend an awful lot of time last year putting together a formal proposal to the Macy Foundation for funding for a restorative justice program within the college. As with most of my attempts to get funding for anything, it was not successful. But I don't know that there's a lot of money that's needed for this. I think what's needed is a commitment to the philosophy and the practice. And then it's just, taking a deep breath and diving in and saying what's possible. Speak with anybody who is interested in moving forward with it.
Great. Are there any principles of RJ that you recommend we as nurses could bring to our daily practice to help us provide better trauma-informed care?
Well, I think the two principles that I mentioned, that of radical hospitality and accompaniment, are both crucial to nursing practice, any nursing practice. In my own practice in hospice, we talk about hospitality all the time, that hospice, the term comes from the Latin word for hospitality. And we recognize that in accompanying an individual and their loved ones through their journey, we are accepting their hospitality at the same time that we're extending our own. And accompaniment, we certainly all recognize in these very raw times how much we need accompaniment through the strife that we're going through. So I think that accompaniment and radical hospitality are both essential to nursing practice in every area.
Can the moms in the Precious Blood Circle be trained to do circles with young men and women before they end up in the prison system? Since you mentioned that men are concerned about their mothers once they are in the prison.
Yeah, there's a lot of the women who have been in the circles who have gone on to receive training, and they have taken it out into the communities in all sorts of different ways. And yes, I think that the mothers' voices and experiences have a lot of power and impact in their communities. And I think that there's great potential for them to make a difference. But the communities, many of the communities that the mothers come from are in such dire need of so many different services, and so many people are struggling, just particularly right now, to make it that, you know, the outreach potential and possibilities right now are probably a little bit limited just by circumstances. Hopefully, once we get out of this newest wave and people are not as isolated, there might be more potential. But yes, the mothers are and have been engaged in carrying this philosophy and practice forward.
All right, and then our last question, do you have a recommended reading list that you could share? If you have quite a few, then I can share it with the group after, if that's easier for you. But if there's anything that's kind of, you know, coming out in your mind right now, Jerry, that you want to share?
Yeah, well, the two that I mentioned in the slideshow, Zare and Braithwaite, are two good places to start in terms of the foundation of restorative justice practice. I would be happy to, and there are other, I mean, more to kind of sort of practical how-to kind of books as well. I don't have the titles in mind right now, but I would be happy to put them together and send them to you, Sarah, if you want to share with the group. Yes. But there is a lot out there. There is quite a bit out there.
I bet.
Yeah.
So yes, I will go ahead and send that to everyone. Next week is when we hope to get the recording. So if any of you had to log in just a little later, you'll be able to hear the full presentation. But that concludes our Q&A with Dr. Gorman. Thank you once again for this discussion. Let's just give her another round of applause. Yay.
Thank you.
And thanks to you all for joining us today. I just have a few closing remarks. Again, this was one in our series on duty. If you visit go.uic.edu/news-events, you'll see all like upcoming events in our on duty series, as well as other alumni events that we have planned. We ask that you also consider if you know a nursing alum that would make a good candidate to be honored with the college's alumni awards. You can find out how to nominate them by visiting go.uic.edu/nursing alum awards. Nominations are due in mid-February. So please go ahead and submit your nominations. And also for our, I know we have a lot of students on this call, for graduating students and for our alumni. We have our alumni mentor program that open enrollment starts every spring. So if you have any questions about this or are interested in signing up, you can just go ahead and email me, salmas1@uic.edu. Again, everything will be linked, my email, contact info, when I send the follow-up email to the group next week. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.